Let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to picture this. You are standing completely alone on a desolate path. The air around you drops rapidly in temperature. A thick, blinding mist rolls in, and suddenly, you hear the distinct sound of heavy footsteps crunching in the gravel right behind you. Do you turn around? Today, we are exploring one of the most chilling phenomena recorded across the globe. We're talking about the terrifying legends of the Gray Man. We are going to examine two deeply unsettling, yet incredibly distinct variations of this phantom. One that haunts the jagged, wind-whipped peaks of Scotland, and another that paces the storm-battered coastlines of South Carolina. It's a journey that's going to take us through centuries of sheer terror, documented by highly credible witnesses who experience things they simply could not explain. But we aren't just going to stop at the fear. We are going to look closely at the data and use actual science to completely unmask the truth behind the apparition.
Every few steps I took, I heard a crunch, as if someone was walking after me, taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of my own. I want you to really feel the weight of those words for a second. This wasn't some campfire ghost story invented by a teenager trying to scare their friends. This account was delivered in 1925 by J. Norman Collie, and Collie was a highly respected professor. He was a noted scientist, a seasoned member of the Royal Geographical Society. Basically, he was a man of logic and facts. Yet while hiking entirely alone near the summit of Ben Macdai in the Scottish Highlands, he felt this invisible giant presence stalking him right through the mist. The sheer, overwhelming panic he felt caused this esteemed mountaineer to run blindly through treacherous boulder fields for nearly 5 miles just to escape. He famously declared that there is something very queer about the top of that mountain, and he vowed he would never return. Now, when a seasoned expert completely abandons logic for blind terror, we really have to ask ourselves, what exactly was hunting him in the mist?
Section 1. The Storm's Warning, South Carolina's Coastal Phantom. To understand the anatomy of these legends, we need to look at how they manifest in different extremes of nature.
Let's start in a completely different environment. We're leaving those freezing Scottish mountains and heading straight into the sultry, salt-laced air of the American South. Specifically, we're traveling to Pawleys Island, South Carolina, to meet our first phantom, the coastal Gray Man. This is a legendary figure completely steeped in tragedy, heartbreak, and hurricane lore. Our story here begins over 2 centuries ago, dating all the way back to 1822. According to the deeply entrenched local lore, a young man was traveling back to Pawleys Island to ask for the hand of the woman he loved. A massive storm was gathering off the coast, turning the sky a bruised, violent purple. Racing against time and the deteriorating weather, he attempted to take a shortcut through the local marshes. But tragically, he and his horse became hopelessly trapped in the thick, quicksand-like pluff mud. He drowned in the dark waters just before he could reach his fiancée. In her overwhelming grief, the young woman began walking the shoreline, and one day, as another severe storm began to brew, she saw a silent figure in a long gray coat staring out at the ocean. It was him. Without speaking a single word, his presence served as a desperate, undeniable warning to flee.
Now, what's truly chilling about all this is how the Gray Man's appearances trace directly alongside the most destructive modern hurricanes to hit the eastern seaboard. Since that first sighting in 1822, this spectral figure hasn't just faded into obscurity, not at all. He appeared right before Hurricane Hazel leveled the coast in 1954. He was spotted by multiple people in 1989 as the catastrophic Category 4 Hurricane Hugo barreled toward the state, bringing a massive 16-foot storm surge that quite literally split the island in two. He was even reported pacing the dunes just before Hurricane Florence devastated the region in 2018. The locals down there, they don't run from him, they watch for him. He is essentially the ultimate supernatural storm siren. If the Gray Man walks, the locals know it is time to pack up and evacuate immediately.
What truly elevates this from a simple, spooky ghost story into a deeply rooted cultural phenomenon is the bizarre aftermath of these sightings. He's seen as a guardian. He is typically described as a man in wrinkled gray clothing, sometimes wearing a long coat, maybe looking a bit like a pirate, with his face obscured by a hat. And the most chilling part of the whole shebang? It's said that the homes of the people who see him are miraculously spared from the storm's wrath. This was actually famously documented on the classic television show Unsolved Mysteries. In 1989, residents Jim and Clara Moore were walking on the beach when they passed a man dressed in gray. They said hello, and the man simply vanished into thin air. Terrified but heedful, they evacuated. When they returned after Hurricane Hugo had utterly annihilated the surrounding community, their home stood practically untouched. So you have to wonder, was it a spectral protector or just the ultimate stroke of luck?
Section 2. The Scottish Mountain Terror. let's cross the ocean once again and see how this legend completely transforms.
We're trading the warm, hurricane-battered beaches of South Carolina for the misty, isolating, and downright hostile peaks of the Cairngorms in the Scottish Highlands. Here, the gray man takes on a profoundly different and honestly far more terrifying identity. The contrast between these two legends is just stark. South Carolina's gray man is a tragic, protective spirit, right? A guardian born of love trying to save his neighbors from the ocean's fury. But Scotland's big grey man, known in Scottish Gaelic as Amphir Leoth Mór, is a predator. Witnesses don't describe a helpful warning. They describe a 10-foot-tall, malevolent presence that cloaks itself in the dense mountain fog. It is characterized by impossibly long, gangly arms, massive, broad shoulders, and a terrifying ability to project a feeling of overwhelming, sickening dread into the minds of anyone who dares approach the summit of Ben Macdui. Make no mistake, it doesn't want to save you, it wants you off its mountain.
The actual encounters recorded on Ben Macdui are the stuff of absolute nightmares. In 1943, a naturalist and highly experienced mountaineer named Alexander Tunian was alone on the summit when a dark, oppressive mist rolled in. He heard loud, echoing footsteps. Suddenly, a massive, strange shape loomed up in the fog and came aggressively charging right at him. Tunian was so genuinely terrified for his life that he drew his revolver and fired 3 shots directly at the figure before turning and sprinting down the mountain as fast as humanly possible. Think about that, an expert pulling a gun on the fog. Just 2 years later, in 1945, Pete Densham, a rescue worker accustomed to extreme danger, heard those exact same slurring footsteps in the gravel. But for him, it got physical. He reported the mist closing in, accompanied by a very real, terrifying sensation of increasing pressure clamping down around his neck, as if invisible hands were literally choking him. He barely escaped the urge to throw himself off the mountain edge just to get away from the feeling.
Section 3. Unmasking the apparition. It's time to peel back the layers of fear and systematically break down the hard science behind the supernatural. So, we have undeniable, visceral terror reported by multiple, highly credible witnesses across centuries and continents. Are we dealing with actual supernatural entities? Is a dead lover pacing the Carolina coast? And is a 10-foot giant stalking the Scottish Highlands? Well, let's unmask these apparitions. The first scientific culprit we absolutely have to examine is called the Brocken specter. This is a breathtaking yet deeply unnerving optical illusion. It occurs when an observer's own shadow is projected onto a cloud bank or dense mist, creating the sudden appearance of a massive, shadowy, humanoid figure standing right in front of them. In fact, the poet James Hogg famously encountered this exact phenomenon on Ben Macdui way back in 1791. He wrote that he was struck powerless with astonishment and terror when he saw a 30-foot giant in the mist. His sheer terror only subsided when he finally realized the giant was mimicking his exact movements. When he removed his hat, the giant removed its hat. The monstrous phantom haunting the mountain was in reality just his own shadow.
I want to walk you through exactly how this atmospheric trickery is orchestrated by nature, because it's pretty fascinating. First off, the observer has to be standing on a ridge or an elevated point. Second, the sun must be shining brightly and directly from behind them. Third, there needs to be a dense bank of fog or mist resting below or directly in front of the observer. What happens is the sun's rays project the person's shadow forward right into the mist. Because the water droplets in the fog diffuse and scatter the light, the shadow isn't crisp, it's distorted, it's magnified, and it's surrounded by a strange, glowing halo called a glory. To the disoriented human brain, which is already stripped of normal depth perception by the thick fog, this projection looks exactly like a giant, 10-foot-tall gray man suddenly rising out of the mist to block your path.
Okay, that explains the visual. But a shadow can't choke you, right? A shadow doesn't sound like crunching footsteps in the gravel. So the really crucial point here is addressing that intense physiological panic, that distinct feeling of being watched, or the awful pressure on the neck that Pete Densham felt. Enter our second scientific explanation, and it's a real game changer: infrasound. Infrasound consists of low-frequency sound waves, typically below 20 Hz, which happens to be just below the threshold of human hearing. But here's the kicker. Just because you can't hear it, doesn't mean your body can't feel it. On Ben Macdui, high-speed winds crashing against the jagged mountain ridges act like a giant natural subwoofer, generating intense infrasound waves. When humans are exposed to these frequencies, it essentially hacks our nervous system. It causes severe physiological reactions. We're talking unexplained anxiety, extreme dread, hyperventilation, shivering, and even the vibration of the fluid in our eyeballs, which can actually cause peripheral visual hallucinations.
That invisible presence choking you in the mist, it is quite literally the sheer acoustic resonance of the mountain itself vibrating your very biology. Section 4. Why we need legends. If science can explain it all away, why do we hold on to these stories so tightly? We've shown the light of science into the dark corners. We know that the giant on the mountain is likely our own shadow paired with infrasound-induced panic. But even with science actively unmasking these illusions, why do these stories endure, passing down through generations from 1822 to today? The answer really lies in how deeply embedded these myths are in our culture. Modern media, like SC Public Radio's South of Spooky podcast, actively continues to investigate and broadcast these local legends today. They interview historians and paranormal experts to explore how these myths shape community values. These stories, they aren't just entertainment. They are the cultural glue that binds a community together. They're shared narratives that give a specific region its unique identity, creating a collective history that connects the present-day residents of Pawleys Island directly to the rice planters of the 1800s.
By breaking down the psychology, we begin to understand the real underlying function of the Grey Man. On the Scottish mountains, the legend provides a narrative framework for the very real physiological symptoms of exhaustion, isolation, hypoxia, and infrasound. It gives a face to the invisible dangers of the wild. Meanwhile, on the coast of South Carolina, the Grey Man acts as a profound psychological coping mechanism. Let's be real, hurricanes are massive, unpredictable, and merciless forces of nature that destroy indiscriminately. They make us feel entirely powerless, but the human mind absolutely craves order. By creating the legend of a protective guardian, a spirit that will warn us and spare our homes if we just pay attention, we reclaim a tiny sliver of control. The Grey Man transforms the chaotic fury of a hurricane into a story with rules, where paying attention to the past can literally save your future.
Which brings us to the ultimate crossroads of logic and legend. We've traced the history, we've outlined the trauma, and we've deployed the science of infrasound and optical illusions to completely unmask the phantoms in the mist. But I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Imagine you are walking alone on the beach at Pawleys Island. The sky bruises purple, the wind howls. And right there, standing silently in the sea spray, a man in a long gray coat turns to look at you. In that terrifying, heart-stopping moment, would you calmly trust the science of atmospheric optical illusions, or would you turn your car around and evacuate? Because sometimes the absolute most logical thing you can do when staring down the fury of nature is to listen to the ghost.